All right, I wanted to go over this endgame by the great endgame practitioner and world champion Capablanca. Here he had the black pieces against sallow floor, and there are some interesting ideas in this position. If you want to pause the video and see what you can find on your own, feel free. All right, and so from black's point of view, there are not so many moves to consider. Playing f4 would give a pawn away. Playing h4 would give a pawn away. And so logical king moves that come to mind are king d5, king e5, or maybe in some cases a king retreat. Let's start with this move, king d5. It looks logical, taking the opposition. Here, white could continue with king d2, which allows for black to temporarily make some progress with their king, with king e4. But after king e2, the progress comes to an end. These squares being held by the white king, these squares held by the pawn. So black would have to retreat and allow white's king to f3. There is another possibility here that black could consider, which is jettisoning this h4 pawn. H4, and after takes, now f4. Hoping for pawn takes pawn, king takes, when a draw would be possible after the king retreats to get in front of the h-pawn. But white is not obligated to capture on f4 and can simply play h5. This puts black in a little bit of a pickle. If king f5, now pawn takes pawn, gives black's king no avenue to the h-file, and capturing this pawn on f4 would put the king outside the square of the white pawn on h5. So this would be winning for white. If instead of h4, though, black retreats back to d5, now the white king comes through on the f3 square. King e5, trying to prevent the white king from getting to the f4 square. And now a very nice move, h3. It would be tempting to push the pawn all the way to h4 in a single move, to lock up the position and give the move to black, forcing black back. But generally, when a pawn can advance either one or two moves, I think this is called Steinitz's rule, it gives that side an advantage, and here white has an advantage, and white can use it. After the king retreats, white's king now can come to the f4 square, attacking the f5 pawn, forcing the king to defend it. It's important to notice this little triangle move, king d5, king e6. If black had simply moved to king e6 first, after king f4, then one of these two pawns would fall. For instance, here and here. If black moves the king away, then king takes f5, and if black plays h4, then g takes h4. This is why this little triangle move, king d5, is used to get to the square to defend here just in time. However, white now has the extra tempo h4, kicking the king back yet again. Here, black is going to have to yield to this pawn, and with it, the game. Okay. So another possibility that black could try in this position would be the move h4 here. But it doesn't work in much the same way as we saw previously. After takes, push, this position is reached again. And we know already that that was winning for white. Sorry, this could also be tried on move 2. So instead of king e4, 2h4 would be another way to transpose into that ending, which is just winning for white. So that h4 idea is an idea that comes up, but so far we haven't seen it work. So instead of king d5, there is another path that black could take. There's actually, I think, two different paths to a draw. The path that seems the most logical to me is to play king f7. I don't know why this seems logical, but For some reason, it just seems like a safer route to the draw. After king f7, if white plays king e2, king g6, king f3, notice here that if white were to play king f2, waiting for us to step forward and then lose a turn, we could play a similar game and just go to king h6, so that when the king comes to f3, we can come to g5. But instead, if he comes to f3 right away, we play king g5. And now the idea with h3 is not quite as useful, because we can play h4, and after the exchange of pawns, we reach a position where if the king takes our pawn on f6, we win the pawn on e4, and of course, otherwise, if they push the pawn, our pawns will just exchange. So that seemed like the easiest line to a draw, in my opinion, just simply king f7. King d5, I think what makes it so interesting is it looks like you're taking the opposition, but you get into all of these positions where white's extra tempos with the h-pawn are winning. There is another way to draw here, though, and that is king e5. And this, I think, is the interesting line, and probably why Capablanca included some notes on the position. Now if white tries king e2, we should say if king d2, then all of a sudden the idea we saw previously does work for black because of the distance from white's king from the action. Now h4, gx h4, f4. If they try this trick, we can capture with check, which wins a crucial tempo. Here black's king will have no problem getting in front of the h-pawns to hold the draw. But assuming after the move king e5, king e2, king e4, here white could try h4, but after king e4, black could try h4, but now it won't work because white's king is one square closer. So here the idea we saw previously that worked with the king on d2 will not work with the king on e2. For instance, g takes h4, f4, h5, king f5, and now ex f4, and we have this pattern again where these pawns hold the king back from reaching the h-file. King e3 would come next to protect the pawn. Okay, and so let's take it from the top. King e5 also draws after king e2, king e4, and now if white tries h3, we have king d5. It's important to notice king e5 here would not work because of something we already saw, king f3, king d5, king f4, and now h4, putting black into zugzwang. But the move king d5 would work. This is kind of an example of corresponding squares. When white's king reaches the square f3, when white's king reaches the square f3, black's king has to be ready to reach the squares either e5 or g5. So we got to this position. Black's king could reach e5. And now it's a draw. There is no way for white to make progress. If h4, this does not put us in zugzwang as it did before, because our king is placed in a better position than it was previously. King d5, again this little triangle move, getting to e6 to defend, just in time. And now if white jettisons a pawn, we can simply exchange them and push f5. Check, king f4, king f6, and black holds the position this way as well. This is, I think, a much prettier variation than the variation that began with king f7, but for some reason the variation that began with king f7 is just more logical to me. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed this study as much as I did, and I hope you enjoy the next one as well.